The crash had been brutal. Metal screaming, flames dancing across the sky, and then ... nothing. Just silence that cut deeper than any blade. Damien Ashford counted each sunrise like a death sentence. 36 days. 36 mornings of waking. Up alone on this cursed world called Delta V47. The air was thick enough to choke on, heavy with moisture that made his clothes stick to his skin like a second layer of misery. His stomach growled constantly, a hollow ache that never went away. But worst of all was the quiet. The terrible, crushing silence that reminded him every second that he was the only human left alive. The mission had started simple enough, too. Simple, looking back. The Terran Recon Corps had sent the Argos to check out Delta V47. Standard stuff. Scan for useful resources, test the weather, and figure out what was causing those weird energy readings from the surface. Nothing fancy. Nothing that should have gone wrong. But halfway down through the planet's atmosphere, everything changed in a heartbeat. A massive energy surge erupted from the ground below them. It hit like lightning, but silent and deadly. Every computer, every system, every piece of technology on their ship died instantly. One moment they were following their landing pattern. The next moment alarms were screaming, metal was bending and breaking, and the sky itself seemed to be on fire. Damien had barely made it to an escape pod before the Argos was ripped apart. Like paper. The last thing he heard was Captain Vance's voice, crackling through the static, yelling at everyone to abandon ship. Then nothing. Complete silence. No wreckage to find. No emergency signals. No bodies. No one. He was alone. The first week he had hope. He searched everywhere, walking through the jungle day after day. His legs ached. His feet were covered in blisters, but he kept moving. He followed the path where he thought the ship had crashed, hoping to find someone, anyone, still alive. But Delta V47 was huge, and every step he took seemed to lead him further away from answers and closer to exhaustion. This jungle was like nothing he had ever seen. It was alive in ways that made his skin crawl. Huge plants with teeth that could snap a man in half. Night hunters with glowing eyes that watched him from the trees, waiting for him to make a mistake. Everything here wanted to kill him. Staying alive became his only job. But even as he built weapons from broken ship parts and found places to hide among the fallen trees, one question haunted him day and night. What happened to his team? The planet had swallowed them whole, and it would do the same to him if he let his guard down. Then, on day 36, he heard it. A scream that made his blood freeze. It was far away but raw, echoing through the trees like a knife scraping against metal. This wasn't the sound of an animal. This was something that could think. Something that was suffering. Damien's fingers gripped tighter around the crude spear he had made from salvaged metal. He had heard enough dying sounds in his life to know that whoever was out there didn't have much time left. Everything in his head told him to walk away, to turn around and pretend he hadn't heard anything. But his feet were already moving toward the sound. The jungle pressed in around him as he walked. Branches scraped against his arms, leaving small cuts that stung in the humid air. Thick roots twisted under his feet, trying to trip him with every step. But he knew how to move through this terrain now. After 36 days, he had learned. His breathing was steady, his focus sharp as the cries became louder and more desperate. Then he saw her. She was trapped, her body rigid with pain. Her tail was pinned under a massive rock that had fallen from somewhere above. But that wasn't what made Damien stop breathing. She was beautiful in a way that didn't seem real. Her skin was a deep purple color, smooth as polished stone under the soft light of the twin moons hanging in the sky. Her hair was long and wild, flowing around her in waves of pure white that seemed to glow in the darkness. Her ears were tall and pointed, covered in soft fur, and they twitched at every small sound, listening for danger in the jungle around them. But it was her tail that caught his attention. It was enormous, thick with dense fur in shades of cream, and light brown. It curled and moved as she struggled to free herself, reminding him of some Arctic predator he had seen in old nature videos. Every part of her seemed designed for hunting, for moving through the world with deadly grace. Now she was hurt, and she knew he was there. Her golden eyes locked onto his, sharp and calculating. The pain in her expression was pushed aside by something. Colder, harder, a warning. She showed her teeth, not because she was desperate, but because she was defiant. Even trapped and injured, she was still dangerous. Damien stopped moving. He had seen that look before. It was the look of someone who refused to show weakness, even when they were dying. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said, keeping his voice calm and steady. Her ears twitched. Her eyes moved to his hands, checking to see if he was carrying weapons. She spoke then, her voice rough with pain. Her accent was strange, musical in a way that made him want to keep listening. He didn't understand the words, but he understood the meaning clearly. "Stay back." Damien didn't move closer. Not yet. Every instinct he had told him that one wrong. Move would turn this tense moment into a bloody fight. But her tail twitched again, and he could see the pain in the way she held herself. She was getting weaker. He let out a slow breath, shifting his weight carefully, keeping every movement slow and obvious. "You can hate me later," he said quietly. "But right now, you need my help." Something flickered in her golden eyes. A moment of hesitation. But she didn't say anything. Damien crouched down next to the rock, studying it carefully. It was heavy, probably weighing more than both of them combined. He looked at the angle it had fallen, the way it had crushed the ground. Beneath it, he didn't waste time talking. He just dug his hands under the cold, sharp edges and started pushing. The weight fought back, pressing into his bones like it was made of pure gravity. His arms shook with the effort. His boots dug deeper into the soft earth as he strained against the rock. He growled through his teeth, pushing harder. The rock shifted slightly. The alien woman gasped, her claws digging into the dirt as she tried to move her trapped tail. "One more push," Damien muttered to himself. He took a deep breath, planted his feet, and heaved with everything he had left. A strained roar of effort tore from his throat as the rock finally rolled free, slamming into the ground with a deep, echoing thud. For a moment, neither of them moved. The jungle around them seemed to hold its breath. She exhaled sharply, curling her tail toward herself. Her fingers brushed over the spot where the rock had crushed it, checking for damage. Her shoulders trembled, but not from fear. From relief. Damien took a step back, raising his hands to show he meant no harm. "See? No damage done." She didn't thank him. She didn't say anything at all. Instead, she just stared at him. The hostility in her eyes was gone, replaced by something else. Curiosity. She was trying to figure him out. Without a word, she turned and melted into the jungle like a ghost. Damien watched her go, his muscles still burning from the effort, his heart pounding from the intensity of the moment. Something deep in his gut told him this wasn't over. This was just the beginning. He looked down at the ground where she had been lying. A few strands of pure white hair lay tangled in the dirt, and next to them he could see the faint marks of her clawed feet. The prints looked hesitant, like she had lingered for just a moment before disappearing. Damien smirked, rolling his sore shoulders. "At least you didn't try to kill me." he said to the empty air, shaking his head. He picked up his spear and turned back toward the depths of the jungle. He wasn't alone on this planet anymore, and neither was she. The hunt continues. The jungle never truly slept. Even in the darkest hours of the night, it pulsed with life. Insects chirped and buzzed in the trees. Distant howls echoed from creatures he couldn't see. The rustling of unseen things moving through the thick undergrowth never stopped. Damien had learned early on that silence was more dangerous than noise. Noise meant life was going on as normal. Silence meant something was hunting. He crouched by his small fire, running a salvaged piece of metal along the edge of his makeshift knife. The blade had come from his escape pod, and its once shiny surface was now dark and worn from weeks of use. It wasn't much to look at, but it had kept him alive so far. A storm was building. He could feel it in the way the air grew thicker, harder to breathe. Thunder rumbled somewhere beyond the treetops, still distant but getting closer. The sky above was almost impossible to see through the dense canopy of leaves, but flashes of pale blue light flickered between the gaps. This planet's version of lightning was strange. It lit up the jungle like dancing ghosts, but made no sound at all. He would need to find better shelter soon. A lean-to he had built would keep off light rain, but not the kind of storm that was coming. Damien stood up, rolling his shoulders to work out the knots of tension. He adjusted the straps of his small pack, his lifeline, filled with what little food he had been able to scavenge. A few strips of dried meat that tasted like leather, a handful of bitter fruits with tough skins, but enough nutrients to keep him going. His supplies were running dangerously low. The safe areas he knew had been picked clean, and he was being forced to venture further and further from his usual hunting grounds. That was dangerous. The deeper he went into this jungle, the less he understood it, the less he could predict what might be waiting for him. The memory of her hadn't left his mind. The alien woman with the golden eyes and the massive tail. The way she had looked at him, not just with suspicion, but with calculation. She was intelligent, that much was clear. But she hadn't attacked him when she could have. She hadn't spoken after he lifted the rock. She had just watched, studied him, then disappeared. He didn't know what to make of her. In all his time on this planet, he hadn't encountered anything else that showed intelligence. No signs of cities or technology. No evidence of civilization. Was she native to this world? Or was she just as stranded as he was? The questions gnawed at him, but survival came first. It always did. Damien tightened his grip on his spear and started moving. His instincts guided him north, toward higher ground where the terrain became rockier and the jungle thinned out just enough to let in slivers of pale moonlight. He had mapped this area before during his early days here. If he kept going, he would reach the cliffs where the air was cooler and the land more open. A good place to wait out the storm. He was halfway up the ridge when the smell hit him. Blood, faint but fresh, carried on the shifting wind. It wasn't human blood. He had learned to recognize that smell from his military days. This was sharper, muskier, with an almost metallic tang to it. And it was close. Damien's grip tightened on his spear as he followed the scent trail. He kept low, scanning the shadows, his pulse quickening. Not from fear, but from something deeper. Something that had been trained into him long ago in combat. Situations. A body lay at the base of a large, slanted rock. Not just any body. She was slumped against the stone, one hand pressed to her side, her breathing shallow and uneven. Her long white hair was tangled with leaves and dirt. That massive, beautiful tail was twitching weakly. The golden glow of her eyes had dimmed, her pupils wide with pain or shock. Damien felt his chest tighten. She was hurt. Badly hurt. For a split second, he hesitated. If she woke up and saw him standing over her, there was no telling how she would react. She might attack first and ask questions later. But then she let out a sharp, pained breath, her body tensing with agony, and Damien was moving without thinking. He crouched beside her, setting his spear down within reach but not threatening. His hands hovered over her wounds, not touching, yet just assessing. Blood, dark, almost black in the moonlight, seeped between her fingers where she held her side. It wasn't a killing wound, but it wasn't minor either. A jagged gash along her ribs, like something had torn into her flesh. A claw, maybe, or a blade. Her ears flicked suddenly. She was waking up. Her eyes snapped open, locking onto his face, and in an instant she was moving. She lunged at him with surprising speed for someone who was injured. Damien caught her wrist just before her claws could reach his throat, twisting just enough to hold her back without hurting her. She was weaker than she wanted to admit. He could feel it in the way. Her strength wavered, but she was still dangerous. Still a predator. "Stop," he ordered, his voice low and firm. "I'm not your enemy." She snarled, a sound that was purely animal, and tried to wrench her arm free. But the movement sent a wave of pain across her face, and her body faltered for just a second. That was all Damien needed. He didn't let go of her wrist, but he didn't tighten his grip either. "You're bleeding," he said simply. A flicker of something crossed her features. Her golden eyes darted down to her own wound, then back to his face. He could see her mind working, calculating the situation, weighing her options. Slowly, she stopped fighting. Damien released her wrist, watching as she slumped back against the stone. She was still tense, still watching him like a cornered predator, but she wasn't attacking anymore. He reached for his pack, pulling out a strip of clean cloth. "I can help," he said, keeping his voice calm and non-threatening. She said nothing, but she didn't try to stop him either. He tore the cloth into strips, working quickly but carefully. She was still staring at him, but her gaze had changed. It wasn't just suspicion anymore. There was something deeper there. She was trying to understand him, to figure out what kind of person he was. Damien pressed the fabric gently against her wound, tying it off with practiced precision. She inhaled sharply at the contact but didn't flinch away. "You're not from here," he said after a moment. It wasn't a question. He could see it in her eyes, in the way she carried herself. She was as much a stranger to this world as he was. Her eyes flickered, her expression unreadable. But then, for the first time since he had found her, she spoke. "No." The single word carried weight. It was a confirmation, an admission. She wasn't native to this planet either. She was stranded, just like him. Damien exhaled slowly, sitting back. On his heels, he studied her face, the way the moonlight caught the purple tones in her skin, the way her white hair framed her features. The pieces were starting to come together in his mind. The storm rumbled overhead, getting closer now. He could feel the first drops of rain starting to fall through the canopy. "We need to move," Damien said, rising to his feet. He extended his hand toward her, not demanding, not forcing, just offering. For a long moment, she just stared at his outstretched hand. Then, slowly, she reached out and took it. Her grip was firm, her fingers warm despite the cool night air. As he helped her to her feet, she swayed slightly, but that massive tail flicked out to help her balance. She was strong, stubborn, proud. Damien found himself smirking. This should be interesting. Together, they disappeared into the jungle, the storm chasing at their backs. Shelter from the storm hit like a living thing. Howling winds tore through the treetops, shaking branches that were thicker than a man's waist and sending sheets of warm rain cascading down in relentless waves. The jungle, which had been oppressively quiet before, now roared with the sound of wind and water. Damien led the way through the dense undergrowth, his grip firm but gentle around her wrist. She wasn't at full strength. He could feel it in the way she moved. Her steps slightly uneven, her breathing a bit too quick. But she was keeping pace with him, and her golden eyes remained sharp and alert, despite the exhaustion weighing on her tail, heavy with water from the rain, swayed behind her as they moved. The thick fur had darkened to a deep brown, and he could see her struggling slightly with the extra weight. But she didn't complain. She didn't even slow down. They needed shelter, and they needed it fast. Damien had explored this area before during his early weeks on the planet, and he knew of a place that might work. A rocky outcrop nestled between some massive trees, naturally shielded from the worst of the weather. It wasn't perfect, but it would keep them from being completely exposed to the elements. Lightning flashed overhead. That strange, silent lightning that was unique to this world. For a moment, it illuminated her face in stark, ghostly detail. She glanced at him, her expression unreadable as always, her wild white hair clinging to her face in wet strands. She wasn't saying much, but then again, she didn't need to. He could feel her studying him, just like she had when he first freed her from the rock. She was trying to figure him out, to understand what kind of person he was, whether he could be trusted. The shelter came into view through the sheets of rain, an alcove of jagged stone jutting out from the hillside, just deep enough to block the wind and most of the water. Without hesitation, Damien pulled her inside, pressing himself against the rough wall as he scanned the jungle behind them. No immediate signs of danger, but that didn't mean much. This planet specialized in ambushes, creatures that could wait, perfectly still for hours, then strike faster than the eye could follow. She leaned against the wall, exhaling slowly. The tension in her shoulders finally began to ease now that they were out of the open and relatively protected. Damien turned to look at her, his eyes dropping briefly to the hastily wrapped wound at her side. The fabric was soaked through with rain and blood, a dark stain spreading across the cloth. She was still bleeding. He crouched in front of her, shaking his head. "You're still bleeding." She made a sound in the back of her throat, something that might have been a scoff. "I know." Her voice was rough, strained with pain and exhaustion. But there was something else in it too, a kind of dry humor that surprised him. Damien pulled his small knife from his belt, cutting away the drenched bandage. She didn't flinch, didn't try to pull away. She just watched him with those piercing golden eyes, her expression guarded but not hostile. The wound was still jagged, still seeping blood, not deep enough to be immediately life-threatening, but serious enough to slow her down and weaken her. Over time, "This needs to be cleaned properly," he muttered, tearing another strip of dry cloth from his gear. He had a small amount of clean water in his pack, and he used some of it to dampen the cloth, wiping away the grime and blood as gently as he could. She inhaled sharply at the contact, her muscles tensing, but she didn't pull away. "You've done this before," she observed after a long moment of silence. Her voice was softer now, less guarded. Damien glanced up, meeting her gaze. There was something in her eyes now, not just curiosity, but a kind of recognition. She had seen people treat wounds before too. She understood what it meant. "Treated wounds, saved people," he said simply. The memories came flooding back, sharp-edged and painful. His time in the Terran Recon Corps. The missions that had gone wrong. The people he had tried to save, and the ones he had failed to save. A moment he considered how much to tell her. How much she would understand. How much she needed to know. "I tried," he said finally. She studied his face, those golden eyes seeming to see right through him. "Did they die?" she asked quietly. Damien tied off the new bandage, pulling it snug, but not tight enough to cut off circulation. "Most of them," he admitted. She was quiet for a long moment, digesting this information. Then she spoke again, her voice even softer than before. "And the ones who didn't?" He looked up at her, a faint smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. "They called me lucky." Something flickered in her expression, a breath of amusement, barely audible over the sound of the rain pounding against the rocks outside their shelter. Then, "I suppose I should be grateful for your luck," she said. There was something about the way she said it, the slight warmth in her voice that made his smirk linger. For the first time since he had crashed on this planet, he felt like he was having an actual conversation with someone. Not just surviving, but connecting. The storm showed no signs of stopping. The wind continued to howl through the jungle, and the scent of rain and wet earth filled the air around them. Damien leaned back against the stone wall, stretching out, his sore muscles, letting himself relax for the first time in days. She shifted beside him, her tail curling slightly around her legs. The thick fur was still damp, but it was beginning to dry in the relative warmth of their shelter. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the rain and the distant sounds of the jungle, both of them lost in their own thoughts, but somehow not alone anymore. After what felt like hours, she spoke again. "What's your name?" The question was simple, but it felt significant somehow, like she was offering him something. A piece of trust, maybe. "Damien," he said. "Damien Ashford." She nodded slowly, as if testing the name in her mind. "I'm Zisha," she said. "Zisha," he repeated, liking the way it sounded. "That's a beautiful name." She looked at him for a moment, something unreadable in her expression. Then she turned her gaze back to the entrance of their shelter, watching the rain fall. "How long have you been here?" she asked. 36 days, he said without hesitation. He had been counting every single one. She was quiet for a moment. 18 days for me, she said finally. So she had crashed after him. The thought raised a dozen new questions in his mind. How had she gotten here? Was her ship destroyed too? Were there others with her? But he didn't ask. Not yet. There would be time for questions later, when they weren't hiding from a storm in a makeshift shelter, when she wasn't wounded and exhausted. For now, it was enough to know that he wasn't alone anymore. That somewhere out there in the vast, dangerous expanse of Delta V47, there was someone else who understood what it felt like to be stranded, to be lost, to be fighting for survival every single day. The storm continued to rage outside, but inside their small shelter, for the first time in weeks, Damien felt something that might have been hope. Space between them. Finally, Zisha spoke. "Why did you help me?" Damien turned his head, raising an eyebrow. The first time, or this time, both, he exhaled, tilting his head back against the rock. "Because leaving you, there would have been wrong," she narrowed. Her eyes slightly. "That simple." He gave her a look. "Why does it need to be complicated?" Zisha didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached out, lightly running her claws over the fresh bandage on her side, as if testing the tightness of the wap. "In my culture," she said slowly, "when someone saves your life, you owe them a debt, a bond that must be repaid." Darman watched her carefully, and you believe that she hesitated just for a second. Yes, a slow smirk tugged at the corner of his lips. "You owe me Now Z's ears flicked her expression. Unreadable, but there was something in her gaze, not irritation. Amusement. Yes, she admitted. Damon let out a breath, shaking his head great. So what does that mean? For Zisha looked at him for a long moment. Before responding, it means I won't let you die. There was no sarcasm in her tonano. Teasing, just fact, and somehow Damon believed her. Another flash of lightning split the sky, followed by a low rumble of thunder. The jungle was restless tonight, but for the first time since he had crashed here, Damon didn't feel entirely alone. He wasn't sure what this presence meant yet, what she would do, where she would go. But he knew one thing for certain: they weren't enemies anymore, and that changed everything. Their storm had passed, leaving behind a jumble damp with fresh rain. The scent of wet earth thick in the air. Water dripped from the canopy in slow, rhythmic droplets pooling in the deep grooves off tangled roots. A faint mist clung to the undergrowth, curling around the trees like ghostly fingers. The sky, once an endless expanse of crackling lightning and howling winds, had calmed, revealing 2 moons hanging low, casting a pale silver light over the world below. Damon sat near the entrance of the rocky alcove, sharpening his blade with slow practice strokes. The fire in front of him flickered lazily, its embers glowing against the damp stone walls across from him. Zisha sat with her back to the rock, one knee bent, her injured Sid still bandaged but no longer bleeding. Her thick fur tail curled loosely around her legs, its cream and light brown hue still damp from the rain. She hadn't said much since they'd stopped to rest, but she watched him in that same unreadable way, golden eyes tracking his movements as if trying to decipher something above him. He had gotten used to the feeling. Finally she spoke. You do not belong here, Damon smirked, not looking up from his blade. No kidding. She tilted her head slightly, the faintest flicker of amusement crossing her features. And yet you are still alive. He paused, running his thumb over the edge of the blade to check its sharpness. I dapped. Z's ears twitched, the thoughtful motion most humans would. Not Damien finally met her gaze, one brow raised. You've met a lot of humans. Have you? Something shifted in her expression. Not quite anger, not quite sadness, but something close enough. Damon didn't press. He had learned long ago that some answers weren't given, they were earned. And Zisha wasn't the type to offer anything for free. The fire crackled between them, filling the silence. You asked me why I helped you, he said after a moment. Zisha tail flickered. He leaned back against the rock, stretching his legs out. I could ask you the same thing. Her golden eyes narrowed slightly. Damon gestured toward his wrapped arm, where faint bruises still lingered from when she had grabbed him. The night before, you could have killed me. When you woke up, you didn't. Zisha sword through her nose. Already saved my life. To kill you then would have been dishonorable. Damon chuckled. Good to know you have a code. She gave him a look, but there was no real heat behind it. A breeze swept through the jungle, rustling the leaves, sending a wave of cool air through the alcoves. His ears twitched at the sound, her posture shifting slightly. Damon watched her for a long moment before speaking again. Were you before this? She hesitated. For I was left here, he nodded. Zisha glanced away, staring at the fire among me people in the fleet. Damien straightened slightly. Fleet, that mean ship space, the possibility of rescue, of escape. She must have caught the change in his expression, because she gave a small humorless smirk. If you think they will come for me, you are wrong. What here is flattened slightly, her tail curling closer around her. Because I was abandoned. Damon studied her, the weight of that admission sinking in. He had suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed was different. She wasn't just stranded, she had been left just like her head. His grip tightened slightly around the hilt of his blade. Why? Zisha was skeet for a moment, her gaze distant. Then finally she said, because I refused to be weak. Damon frowned. That's a hell of a reason to leave someone behind. She let out a short, bitter laugh. Not to them. He didn't like the way that sounded. Zisha turned back to him, her golden eyes sharp despite the exhaustion still clinging to her features. And you, your people. Damon exhaled, running A hand through his damn fair, same story different, ending her ears twitched. You were abandoned. No Hess shook his head. I lost them, something passed between them, then unspoken Butte understood. She didn't press, he didn't explain, another breeze rolled through. Jungle carrying the scent of damp leaves and distant flowers, the fire crackled softly between them, casting shadows along the stone walls. Zisha shifted lightly wincing as she adjusted her injured side without thinking. Damon reached out steadying her with a hand against her arm. Her entire body went still, his fingers brushed against her skin. Warm, smooth, firm beneath his touch, her golden eyes flickered to his unreadable in the firelight. Damon didn't move, didn't let go for the first time. She wasn't guarded, was calculating, she was just there, caught in the same moment. He swallowed his voice quieter. Now you okay? Zisha didn't answer right away. Then slowly she nodded. Damon started to pull his hand back, but before he could cease, fingers wrapped around his wrist, stopping him. His heart kicked against his ribs. She wasn't pulling him closer, wasn't pushing him away, just holding him there, as if testing something, as if trying to decide where the line between hesitation and decision really was. Then before either of them could break the silence, she leaned in. It was brief, barely more than a breath of contact. Viewed it was intentional. Z's lips brushed against his, hesitant, searching, a flicker off, something unspoken passing between them in that single heartbeat of a moment. Then she pulled away, her expression unreadable once more. Damon exhaled, his pulse still racing, his mind still catching up. Well, he murmured, his voice rougher than before, that's one way to say thanks. Zisha smirked, but there was something softer in it this time, something that hadn't been there before. You talk too much, she muttered, before shifting slightly closer, the warmth of her body brushing against his arm. Damon huffed a quiet laugh, shaking his head. This was dangerous. Whatever this was, wherever it was going, it was dangerous. But for the first time since crashing onto this godforsaken planet, Damon didn't feel like a dead man walking for the first time. He felt alive. The jungle stretched out in every direction, vast and untamed, illuminated by the pale glow of the twin moons overhead. The storm had passed, but its presence lingered in the dampness of the air in the way. The leaves still dripped with rain, in the fresh scent of earth and foliage that filled Damon's lungs. The fire between him and Zisha crackled, softly casting flickering shadows along the stone walls of their temporary shelter. It had been 2 days since their first real moment of connection. A kiss, brief but intentional, unspoken, yet undeniable. It hadn't been an accident. It hadn't been hesitation. It had been a choice. And Zisha had not distanced herself, since if anything she had grown closer, not just physical life. That was the most obvious change. She stayed within arm's reach when they traveled. She walked beside him, not a header behind. She no longer kept her tail curled protectively around herself when she rested. Instead it occasionally brushed against him, a silent reassurance that she was still there. There was a weight to this, something neither of them had acknowledged aloud, but both felt in the quiet moments between words. Damon wasn't sure what to do with it. He had lived his life without attachments, his time in the tan. Recon Corps had drilled into him the idea that nothing was permanent, not friendships, not missions, not even life itself. Bonds were fragile, people were lost, promises were broken, but Zisha wasn't fragile. She was a survivor, a fighter, a forcible Rapidin, sharp instincts and fierce loyalty. And she had chosen him. Now he had to decide whether he would choose her back. Zisha sat across from him, tending to the small knife she had taken from Himalaya, running her claws carefully over its edge, testing the sharpness. Her long white hair had dried, flowing freely over her shoulders, and her golden ice reflected the firelight, flickering like molten metal. Damon leaned back against rock, stretching out his legs, exhaling slowly. You're awfully comfortable with my knife. Zisha smirked faintly, still inspecting the blade. You were not using it. He raised an eyebrow. I was. She tilted her head. Not well, Damon scoffed. So now you're an expert in human weapons. Zisha ran a single claw along the blade's edge, testing its sharpness. A weapon is only as useful as the hands that wield it. He huffed a quiet laugh, shaking his head, And let me guess you think your hands are better than mine. Her smirk deepened. I know they are. Daman smirked back, watching the way she held his weapon, with the confidence of someone who had spent a lifetime fighting. There was something deeply captivating about that, about her. Had known warriors before, but none like Zisha. None who looked at him the way she did now, none who called him Matahi. Exhaled, running a hand through his hair. So this whole life-death thing Zishia's. Twitched at the shift in tone. Yes, he watched her carefully. What exactly does that mean, Zisha? Placed a knife down beside her, finally meeting his gaze fully. It means I will not leave you, that I will fight for you, that I will kill for you. Her voice was steady, certain. There was no hesitation in her words, no doubt to her. This wasn't something to question, it was simply fact. Damien let those words settle. He spent most of his life relying on himself, depending on no one now. There was someone willing to stand beside him, fight for him, bleed for him. Not because she had to, but because she had chosen to. And that terrified him more than anything. He forced himself to smirk, try to lighten the weight, pressing against his ribs. So does that make me your responsibility now? Aziz's tail flickered a glint of amusement in her golden eyes. It makes you my mate. Damien felt something stir in his chest, something unfamiliar, something dangerous. He leaned forward, slightly resting his elbows on his knees. You keep saying that. What does it actually mean? Zisha studied him for a moment, then exhaled, her voice quieter now. Among my kind, a life debt is not a simple thing, is not repaid with favors or words. It is bonded. It is a claim. Damien's smirk faded slightly. A claim, Zisha nodded. A vow, a promise. His throat full dry. And what happens if I don't accept it? Zisha blinked slowly. Then I will wait until you do. The fire crackled between them, its warmth pressing against Damien's skin, but it wasn't the fire making his pulse quicken. It was the certainty in her voice, the absolute conviction in her words. She had already chosen. The question was, would he? Zisha tilted her head slightly. You do not wish to belong to someone? Daman let out a quiet breath, running a hand over his jaw. It's not that, it's just, I've never belonged to anyone before. Zisha watched him for a long moment, then shifted forward, closing the small space between them. When she spoke again, her voice was softer then. I will teach you what it means. Damien swallowed his gaze, locked on hers. She was close now, close enough that he could feel the warmth of her skin, close enough that her scent earth reigned. Something uniquely Zisha filled his lungs, and then she did something unexpected. She reached out and took his hand. Her fingers were warm, strong, but careful, as if she was giving him a chance to pull away. He didn't. Instead, he turned his hands slightly intertwined. The fingers, E's ears twitched, her expression unreadable, but her tail curled slightly behind her, a silent acknowledgement of the moment between them. For the first time since he had crashed onto this planet, Daman felt grounded, not lost, not waiting, just here with her. Z's voice was quiet when she spoke again. You are mine, Daman Ashford. A shiver ran down his spine at the way she said his name. Not a statement, not a question, a promise. Damien exhaled, slowly squeezing her hand, just slightly. In your mind. Z's lips curved, not a smirk, not amusement, something deeper, something real. And as the jungle whispered around them, as the fire burned low, as the world outside remained vast and untamed, Daman knew whatever happened next, they would face it together. The jungle was different now. Not in the way it looked. Bioluminescent flora still pulsed with eerie blue light. The canopy stretched endlessly overhead, and the distant calls of unseen creatures still echoed through the trees. But to Damien something had shifted. The jungle no longer felt like a cage, a vast and unforgiving wilderness where survival was a daily struggle. It felt temporary for the first time since crashing onto this planet. Daman had a way out. The distressed beacon. He had barely thought about it before. What was the point, even if it was still intact? It had been buried beneath the wreckage of the Argus for over a month. His team was gone. If there had been any chance of rescue, it would have come already. At least that's what he had convinced himself. That things are different. Now Zisha was different. Or maybe they spent the past 2 days making their way through the jungle, moving toward the last known location of his ship. Zisha walked beside him, no longer keeping a wary distance as she had before. She trusted him now, in a way he hadn't expected. And in turn he had learned to trust her. She was no longer just a stranger, no longer just a warrior with sharp claws and sharper eyes. She was his and he was hers. It was a thought that should have unnerved him, but instead it settled into his bones. Like something inevitable, the terrain grew rougher as they traveled, the trees thinning, giving way to jagged cliffs and rocky outcroppings. Damon recognized this place. He had passed through here before, back when he was searching for his crew, back when he had still hoped he wasn't alone. But now he wasn't. Zisha stopped suddenly, her ears twitching, her tail flicking in a way that told Damien she had sensed something. He didn't question it. He had learned quickly that when she reacted to something, it was best to listen. "What is it?" he asked, keeping his voice low. She didn't respond. Immediately lifted her chin slightly, inhaling. Her golden eyes scanned the rocky cliffs ahead, sharp and alert. "We are not alone," she murmured. Damien's muscles tensed instinctively. Human. Zisha shook her head. "Not human, that wasn't necessarily better." Damien slowly unshouldered his rifle, the one he had pieced together from salvage parts weeks ago. It wasn't in perfect condition, but it still worked, and right now that was enough. Zisha flexed her fingers, claws glinting in the dim light. They moved forward cautiously. The wreckage of the Argos came into view, a massive, twisted husk of metal half buried in the rocky terrain. Damon felt something tighten in his chest at the sight of it. He had crawled out of that wreckage alone, convinced that everyone else was either dead or missing. That the ship wasn't untouched. Something had been here. Zisha crouched beside him, her tail curling slightly, her eyes narrowing. The scent is fresh. Damon's grip on his rifle tightened. Predator's Zet exhaled, slowly tilting her head as if considering. No, Damon didn't like that answer. They moved closer, stepping over scattered debris, glass and burnout wires. The ship was beyond repair, its hull cracked open like a dead animal left to rot, but the beacon should still be inside. Buried somewhere beneath the wreckage, they reached what had once been the ship's communications bay, or what was left of it. Damon sifted through the rubble, pushing aside twisted metal and broken panels, then a flash of red. The beacon, it was still intact. Damon let out a breath, reaching for it, brushing away the dirt and debris. He flipped the device over, checking its power levels. The screen was cracked, flickering slightly, but it was still functional. "We can send a signal," he said. Glancing at Zisha, she watched him carefully. "And what happens when they come?" It was a fair question. Damon had no guarantee who would answer the distress call. The Terran Recon Corp, passing freighter, his own people, or someone else who might not be friendly. He exhaled, turning the beacon over in his hands. "I don't know." Zisha was quiet for a long moment, then finally she said, "I will go with you." Damien looked at her, She wasn't just saying it, she had already decided. He swallowed, his throat suddenly dry. "You didn't have to." I know. His grip on the beacon tightened. Zisha had a choice, and she had chosen him without another word. Damon activated the beacon. A pulse of energy surged through the air, the device humming to life as it sent out a distress signal across the void of space. No. All they had to do was wait. Zisha stepped closer, watching the sky. "If it is our people who come, will they accept me?" Damien didn't answer right away. He knew the truth. Humans feared the unknown, feared what they didn't understand. Zisha was otherworldly, a warrior, unlike anything they had encountered before, but was his, and he wouldn't let anyone take that from him. "If they don't," Damien said, his voice firm, "then they're not my people." Zisha studied him for a long moment, then nodded as if that answer was a no. The jungle was quiet around them, the only sound the soft hum of the beacon pulsing its signal into the stars. Damon didn't know what would come next, but for the first time he wasn't afraid of the future, because whatever happened next, Zisha would be by his side, and that was all that mattered. The distress beacon pulsed with a steady rhythmic glow. sending its signal into the vastness of space. It was a simple fingerpiece of broken technology half buried in the wreckage of a ship that no longer mattered, but to Daman it was everything. It was the first step toward leaving this planet, the jungle. Around them was silent waiting, as if the world itself held its breath. The sky stretched endlessly overhead, painted in deep shades of violet and blue. The twin moons, casting long silver shadows across TerraTales. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and the lingering charge of the storm that had passed hours ago. He had spent his entire life relying on himself, knowing that people could be lost, that bonds could be broken, that Zisha had chosen him, and he was beginning to realize just how much he wanted to choose her back. The beacon continued to pulse. The jungle remained still, then a sound, faint, distant but unmistakable. The rumble of engines. Breaking through the atmosphere, tensed immediately, her ears flicking, her tail bristling slightly. Daman turned toward the sky, scanning the darkness. A single blinking light flickered against the void, growing brighter by the second. Samin had heard. MZ's claws flexed at her sides. We should move to higher ground. Damien nodded, already pulling her with him. They climbed the rocky slope near the wreckage, taking cover beneath an overhanging ridge. From here they had a clear vantage point of the clearing below and of whoever was coming for them. The ship broke through the clouds, its hull gleaming under the twin moons. It was human. Terran design. Damon's breath caught his people. A wave of emotions surged through him. Relief, tension, something dangerously close to hope. But as the ship descended, he glanced at Zisha. She wasn't moving. Her golden eyes were locked on the ship. Her expression unreadable. She had followed him without hesitation. Had chosen Heimdall when it had meant abandoning everything she had ever known, but now she was stepping into his world. Daman felt something twist in his chest. Would she be safe? Would they accept her? Would she regret it? Slowly he reached for her hand. Zisha blinked, startled, but she didn't pull away. Instead, she laced her fingers through his. The engine roared, kicking up dust and debris. As the ship settled onto the ground a moment later, the boarding ramp lowered and a group of figures emerged. Terran soldiers, weapons at the ready. Daman tightened his grip on Z's hand. Stay close, she did. They moved together, stepping into the open, the wind from the ship's thrusters whipping around them. One of the soldiers stepped forward, lowering his weapon just slightly as his gaze locked onto D. Lieutenant Ashford. Damien exhaled sharply. Yeah, the sodders. Gaze flicked to Zisha, his posture tensing, his grip on his rifle tightened. And who the hell is this? Damien didn't hesitate. She's with me. The soldier frowned. Sir, we weren't expecting. Damien cut him off. I don't care what you were expecting. He squared his shoulders, his voice firm. She's coming with me. A long silence stretched between them. The other soldiers exchanged uncertain glances, then finally the lead soldier gave a slow nod. Understood. Damien turned to Zisha. She was watching him carefully, golden eyes searching his face as if waiting to see if he would change his mind. He didn't. He lifted a hand to her cheek, fingers brushing over her skin, memorizing this moment. You're sure about this? Z's tail curled slightly, a slow smirk tugging at her lips. I told you once, Daman Ashford. Her voice was soft but steady. Or mine. Daman huffed a quiet laugh. Yeah. I remember. She leaned, and first the kiss was slow, deliberate, not a promise, not a question, a claim. The hum of the ship faded. The jungle disappeared for just that moment. It was only them, and when she pulled back, Damien laced his fingers through hers once more and led her toward the waiting ship. They were leaving this planet together, and no matter what waited for them in the stars, Daman knew he wouldn't face it alone. He had her. And she had him, always. The Horizon drifted through the vast emptiness of space, a floating city of steel and artificial air carrying them toward a future neither of them had fully decided. Here there was no jungle, no storms, no constant fight for survival. There was only silence, the steady hum of the ship's engines, and the strange and familiar feeling of safety. And yet, despite the walls of metal and glass around them, Damien still felt the weight of the past month clinging to him. Fairness of survival, the sharp edges of instinct that refused to dull, The jungle had stripped him down to something primal, something brutal it had forged. Him into a man who had fought for every breath, and Zisha had become part of him in a way. He couldn't explain she had been his enemy, his reluctant ally, his protector, and now his mate. And that meant more than just survival, that meant belonging. Their quarters were small but private, a standard issue bed, a small table, a storage locker. It wasn't much, but after sleeping on cold ground for weeks, it might as well have been a palace diamond. Stood near the doorway watching, as Zisha ran her fingers over the unfamiliar fabrics of the bedspread, her golden eyes thoughtful. She had adapted. Well, that she was still learning this world. He approached slowly, giving her space to adjust. You still don't like it here, do you? Zisha exhaled, tilting her head slightly. It is different good, or a different bad? She hesitated, as if searching for the right words. Not bad, just quiet. Damien smirked. Most people icky. Her gaze flicked to him, unreadable. I liked how quiet the words settled between them, carrying more weight than she probably intended. She wasn't just talking about the jungle, she wasn't just talking about survival. She was talking about them. Damien swallowed something warm, curling in his chest. Hess stepped closer, closing the space between them. Zisha, she looked up, and he saw understanding in her eyes. She had felt it too, without another word. Daman reached out, brushing his fingers against the wrist. She didn't pull away. Instead, she turned her hand, pressing her palm against her fingers, tracing thoroughness of his callous skin. His heart pounded. She had always been a force, wild and untamed, but now she was here in his hands, choosing him. She raced first to move. She closed the distance between them, her warmth pressing against him, her scent filling his lungs. Earth rain, something uniquely Zisha. Her hands slid over his shoulder, slow and deliberate, memorizing the shape of him. His breath hitched. Are you sure? Her lips curved slightly. Do you still not understand what I mean when I say you are mine? Damien exhaled sharply, then captured her mouth with his. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't desperate. It was claiming the same way. They had always fought the same way. They had always moved around each other. There was no hesitation, no doubt, only this. His hand slid up her arms, gripping her waist, pulling her flush against him. He could feel every inch of her strength, the way she held herself, not as something fragile, but as something unbreakable. Let out a quiet sound against his lips, something between a growl and a sigh, and Darman felt his restraint snap, lifted her easily, pressing her back against the nearest surface. The wall, the bed, he didn't care. She belonged in his arms, against him. Around him, her fingers tangled in his hair, sharp claws grazing against his scalp, but never cutting, never harming. She had the power to hurt, but she never would, not him, and that trust, unspoken, unbreakable, meant more than anything. Daman's mouth traveled lower along the curve of her jaw, the hollow of her throat, the place where her pulse beat steady and strong, her tail wrapped around his leg, pulling him closer, and damn, if that wasn't the most intoxicating thing he had ever felt. Her voice was low. Breathless. You are mine. He smirked against her skin. In your mind. She kissed him again, harder. This time like she needed to remind him that she was still a warrior, that she would fight for him as fiercely as he fought for her. Damon had never belonged to anyone before, but he belonged to her, and she belonged to him. The universe could burn. Wall between their worlds could come crashing down around them. It didn't matter. They had survived together. They would live together, and whatever came next, they would face it as one.